Hope everybody's doing well. I just came back from doing that very important thing of making sure that you've got a place to stay. That's right. I went back and signed those papers to renew the lease. So another 14 months of this particular apartment complex, because that is always a good thing to do when they send you that letter and they're like, hey, do you want to renew? And you have to decide whether you're going to renew at what rate and what kind of space you're going to do. So another 14 months in this particular place, unless something better comes along or unless other opportunities in life come along. But definitely looking forward to it, looking forward to having amazing conversations with amazing guests, because definitely in order to do these shows, you need to have a place to stay in order to do them. So it was good to go sign that piece of paper and to have them check on the insurance. The insurance was up to date and they were like, you're good to go, and all in that space. Now I just need to do some spring cleaning, because that's another important part of living in a place, is doing that spring cleaning and spring existence, because definitely need to do a little bit of that in this particular location as well. But when I stepped outside, I did see that it was a little cooler than it had been a couple of days ago, because definitely there is a cool breeze blowing. It's probably more close to the 70s than the 80s that it was in yesterday here in Durham, North Carolina. So I did have a chance to check out that cool weather and all in that space. And of course, this was a busy weekend. A good friend of mine who's got a funk band, they were performing at a local club here. So I made a chance to go check him out. He's actually a friend and a client. So I went to go check out his funk band, and they definitely rocked the house. Of course, he would have liked to have seen more people at that particular location, but isn't that always the case? Whether you're doing speaking, whether you're doing TV shows, whether you're doing performances, you always want more crowd, but you always give the best to whatever crowd you have. And he definitely delivered and gave a stellar performance, and all in that way. And as many of you know, I work at the Haiti Heritage Center, a cultural arts center here in Durham, North Carolina, and that was very busy this weekend as well. As a matter of fact, we had a band, a Indian artist. I think trying to think of the style of music that he plays, but it definitely begins with an S and all in that space. But he literally came from New Delhi and was here to perform at that particular theater, which is a converted church. It was a church originally, and that church has moved. So it is now a performance hall center that is celebrating a lot of the African American culture and all in that kind of a way. And I think the musical style is called Sufi, if I remember correctly. But if anybody knows and wants to correct me, they can definitely do that as well. But he came in, him and his band, and it was a full band that came in from none other than New Delhi. So definitely they were there and were enjoying themselves. And I got to enjoy some Indian food on that particular day, because there was a newer Indian restaurant that is here in the area that we call the Triangle. Only they were in the area of think they're in the Raleigh area. As a matter of fact, I know, now that I think about it, I know they're in the Raleigh area. So I got a chance to check that out. And then on Saturday, there were various classes that were going on in that same center. Well, classes and organizations. There is a quilting circle that meets regularly. They meet about once a month, but they were having their meeting of quilters. And then the jazz band that practices regularly on Saturdays was practicing downstairs. And then, of course, there was a dance group that was practicing upstairs as well, dancing and drumming, because they do both African dancing and African drumming, and they were having their classes upstairs. So lots of music circulating around the building over the weekend. And then on Sunday, it is a converted church, but there are also sometimes churches that rent the facility. Lately, a smaller church, because it has not gotten up to the size of being in the performance hall, which was the sanctuary. So they actually were having church service in one of our classroom spaces and had about 30 or so parishioners there. And of course, it being Mother's Day, they also had a little bit of a Mother's Day meal as well. So that's some of the things that have been going on in my life. I did get a chance to watch a schoolmate play basketball, and actually one of the places that I got to know a little bit about theology, because as far as I'm concerned, if you go to this certain university, you wind up getting two minors, no matter what they say. Because I have a journalism degree from the fine institution of Marquette. But if you go to the fine institution of Marquette, they require, at least they did, I think they still do, about 21 hours of philosophy and theology in terms of the amount of courses that they require you to have. So, like I said, it is a Jesuit university, but with 21 hours I would consider that almost another minor. So, like I said, I feel that I had a minor in theology and philosophy, even though my regular minor was in political science and all in that space. So, I was actually yesterday rooting for Doc Rivers, who just got killed in that game that they were having against Boston and all along those lines. And now people are wondering about his fate as a coach, or whether he'll be back to coach at Philly, or what will be happening in his world. But he was at Marquette at the same time that I was when hardship in my junior year, and definitely would have graduated in the same class, even though I was a December graduate. But like I said, one of the guests that I invited was none other than Bill Cohen. And Bill Cohen has definitely been on his own spiritual quest. And like I said, I learned about C.S. Lewis and those whole tapes that C.S. Lewis had done and all in that space because of that, what amounted to a minor and all along those lines. So definitely, I remember having, ironically, a theology professor that was very much liberal at Marquette and actually practiced what some people might consider liberation theology. And then I also had a very conservative professor as well. And of course, he introduced me, and I still may even have a copy of the book laying around here in the house somewhere or another, the Screw Tape Letters, and all in that space. So anybody that knows C.S. Lewis knows that that was a very popular book of his, and definitely one that was used by a lot of folks in that academic setting. And like I said, going to that Jesuit university, that fine Jesuit university, I felt that theology and philosophy might as well have been a second major and all in that space. So, Bill, I'm sure folks will be interested to know about your story and some of your own journey. And we've got some other guests going to be joining us. But you went through reading and even reasoning with God. And I know that sometimes I'll even have a conversation. Sometimes people will be like, is he talking to himself? Is he talking to God? We're not sure what he's doing and all in space. But I definitely believe that it is always good to have those regular conversations, and sometimes to make them out that it sounds like you're muttering to yourself or all in that space, but maybe you're actually just having a conversation with God. So I definitely think that that is a realism that does happen to a lot of folks, because a lot of times we're wondering what is the next step, what is the next journey in terms of after this particular life, and also that whole purpose of trying to figure out your purpose and all in that lines. And I think that that is a continual journey that we all go on. And it seems like you have been going on this philosophical search a lot in your own life. So if you'll just share with our audience a little bit about your own philosophical search.
Well, thank you, Mark, for having me on the show. My journey was one, I kind of break my life into three parts. I think all of our lives are broken into different parts, but if you follow the journey that I was on, there's three parts. There's one part before you're ever interested in God at all. You don't know God, you're not interested in God, you want to do your own thing, your own way. So that's what I call rebelling, that first period, until you have any idea there might be a God. And then for me, came as a sudden awareness that I looked at the same problems in our world that had been happening my whole life at that point. And I was a little over 40 then, and they were the same. And I had two small children. So I thought, well, I'd like to make a difference for them for the future. And so I decided I would start with philosophers. So I did take classes in college, but I wasn't serious about it. It was just getting through college. But now I got serious about it, and I just started reading philosophers until I got to the modern day philosopher, and that you spoke of, C.S. Lewis, his book, Mere Christianity. And he had a paragraph in there that once I read it, I was no longer in that rebellion stage. I was moved to stage 2, which is what I call wrestling with God. And that stage is when you decide, is he real? Are you real, God? Is this what you say in the Bible the truth, or what is it? And because through my life, I had been hearing all kinds of things from lots of different sources that were saying, it was made up story by different people. We're 40 different authors over 1,500 years. How could they write a coherent story? So then I spent the next, I'd say 14 years wrestling with God. And that's to try to, like Jacob did, I'm wrestling with God. Are you real? Are you going to help? Are you there? Can I count on you? Can I trust you? And then once I was convinced, I started the last phase, which I've been in now for 20 years. And that is reasoning with God. So reasoning with God, some people think I'm trying to, somehow change God's mind, or no. Reasoning with God is me trying to understand the truth so that I can use that truth to change my life. And that's what I've been doing since then.
Well, one of the things that's come up on a couple of our shows, and I just love to hear your thought as a philosopher. I remember many years ago, my dad, who's not one of the most religious persons in the world and everything, and sometimes he might even joke that he is very anti-religious and all in that space. But he did call me, and I want to say my younger brother, over to watch a documentary. And it was a documentary on theology. And I want to say it was one of our great news anchors, whether that was Peter Jennings or Ted Koppel. For some reason, I'm thinking it was Ted Koppel. And they were doing a piece on religion. And one of the things that the substance or the narrative about this particular special, and this is probably like 10, 15 years ago, was that a lot of the messages of the various religions of the world are really like-minded. You know, there's a thing of definitely honoring your parents, honoring Mother Nature, respecting one another, and a lot of other commonalities that the various religions have in the world. And that sometimes we get caught up in the cult of personalities and in the building and in some of the other things, and that's where the division points happen. And I do know that even in the Bible, there's that whole notion of the Tower of Babel and a couple of other things. But I'm just wondering your thoughts when you see all these world religions, even in Christianity. There are I've lost track how many denominations there are, but there are hundreds and thousands of them, it seems,
Yes.
all in that space. And a lot of times they are preaching a message of similarity, even if we think of religions that are supposedly diametrically opposed. Like you want to look at like the Islamic religion and Christianity, or Christianity and Jewish religions, and even some of the Eastern religions. It does seem the commonality is more than the difference, but I don't know that we spend enough time on the commonality. But I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I would refer back to the same person, C.S. Lewis. There's a story that he was walking down the hall, and these professors had written all of the different religions on this big giant board, and they saw him walking down the hall, and they called him in, and they said, "What's the difference?" And he said, "That's simple, grace." And he walked out of the room. There's only one religion that is founded on grace. And yes, they all have things in them that you would consider good, which God would consider good.
Yeah.
But the difference is none of the others have grace involved in there. They're more works than they are grace. And one interesting thing is when you think about Jesus, when he walked the earth, he had a discussion with Pontius Pilate when he was on trial. And Pontius Pilate said, are you a king? And Jesus responded by saying, "You say I am a king. For this purpose I have come." And then he said, to bring the truth. So then Pontius Pilate responded, "What is the truth?" And then he walked away. He didn't want to know what the truth was. He didn't think it was possible to find it out, and he walked away. But Jesus told us numbers of times while he walked the earth that he was the truth. He said, "I am the truth, the way, and the life." The truth. But if you think about the truth, everything that you see as reality, your version of reality, is based on something that you believe to be true. Well, if Jesus is the Son of God, he is the truth, and everything should be built off of him. So any other religion would be built off something else, and it might have good elements, but it's not from God.
Because I know that I heard a interesting narrative that was similar, and it was that somebody had gone up to heaven, and they had noticed that there was people of different faiths up there in heaven, and all along those lines. As a matter of fact, the joke that I heard, and you probably heard the joke as well, was that the person is coming up to heaven, and they are told to be very quiet, and they're saying, "Hey, be very quiet. We're going to put you in section 4, so just be very quiet when we get by section 5. Just be very quiet, and we're going to put you in section 4, but just be very quiet." And the next person comes up, and it's something similar. It's like, go up to section 3, but then that person is like, "Be very quiet when you get to section 5 and everything, because just be very quiet in that particular space and everything." everything. And they keep going, and everybody's been told to be very quiet at that point. And at some point, somebody decides to get to Gabriel or one of the other archangels, and they're like, "Why are we being quiet when we came by that section?" And he pauses, and he's like, "Because they think that they're the only ones here."
Well, I just that's a funny joke, by the way. To respond to that, I think there will be people there from all religions, but they will be there. I don't know why I can't tell you what the dividing point is, other than Jesus said he is the way, and he's the only way, and no one will come to the Father except through him. But what does that mean, through him? It might be that somebody gets some light shined on them. They're in another religion in another country. They really don't have any ability to dig deep into finding out about Jesus, but they respond to the light in a way that causes them to be a man or a woman after his own heart. And so I think that's possible. I don't know the exact details, obviously, because they're not spelled out in the Bible, except that Jesus says he is the way. So.
Yeah, that is definitely said in the Bible and all along those lines. The other thing that a lot of times people get concerned about, and I was just wondering your thought, and I've had different people of different parts of Christianity on, is we seem to be in a very divided time, and a lot of times there are divisive forces, including some of the evangelical forces that can be divisive also. But I was just wondering, what do you think that the message of God is to this particular world that we are living in? Because it is saying that we are very much in a divided world, and sometimes those divisions are around religious aspects. We've even heard people that have tried to tie religion into what is going on with Putin and Ukraine, even for reasons to support them as well as reasons not to support them. Because I've heard the religious argument from both sides of that kind of aspect, and we definitely heard that with apartheid, and we've seen religion used to justify some horrid things, including slavery. So I just wondered, what do you think the thought would be of God toward the divisive aspect of Christianity and religion in general?
Okay, so when Jesus was here, he said, "Be of one mind." And Paul addressed the issue when he was in Philippi. There were some people coming in. One of them was Peter, so it's an apostle, coming in and trying to teach them something that was outside of what Jesus taught. And he told them, stop doing that. And he told the people, don't listen to that. Just stick to what Jesus said. And so if you think about what Jesus said, he wanted us to be of one mind. That's what he told us to do. So, you and I have not talked prior to this. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of strange that, or coincidental that you would bring this part about divisions up, because for the past year, I've been working on a process because of what we saw last year with the abortion discussion and the Supreme Court. It's just another one of those things that's dividing our country. And so I look at them as wounds. Every time there's a wound, it divides our country. And when it divides our country, excuse me one second. Something was going to come on and I didn't want us to be disturbed. When it divides our country, it hurts us. We are no longer able to unite. So what happens is Christianity gets put on one side or the other, and it drives people away from God. And that's wrong. So I've been working on a process called pro-love. So if you think last year the big battle was pro-choice or pro-life, but neither side is really representing what God has told us in the Bible, neither side. So there has to be a way to come up with a third choice called pro-love that is totally supported by God, where you could go and say, okay, here's the solution to this problem. And we can do it on every issue, whether it's, race or politics or whatever. We could do the same thing. We can, if we honestly go to the Bible and we're reasonable enough to talk with each other and open enough to say, this is my opinion, this is what it's based on, and you tell me what your opinion is, what it's based on, we could come to common ground. And it wasn't that many years ago, I'm old enough now to know, there wasn't that many years ago where that was fairly normal in most communities. Mm-hmm. My grandparents did that kind of stuff all the time, and they were still friends. Their friends came over. They had a little wine. They talked about whatever the subject was. They got in a little heat. The little heat was going on because they're on different sides of the issue. And then they both left. And when they left, a little of that heat created a little light in the difference between them. And that moved them closer. But they were still friends. Weren't mad at each other. They didn't throw things at each other, start hitting each other. That's what we need to get back to. So we need to come up with things. So it just along those lines, this past year, it took me a long time to get a group of people together to be able to have a conversation like you and I are having on a video about pro-choice and pro-life. And then we had a second video that was on pro-love. What does God really want us to do on this abortion issue as Christians? And then we came out with a final position statement. Well, it's not final. We call it the first draft. It's our final one, but now we're opening it up to the community. Get in, read it. What do you agree with or disagree with, and why? And let's have a conversation that builds a support system so that the people that are involved, the woman that's pregnant, the man that was somehow involved in the process, can have a way to deal with the situation without the stigmas that are involved right now, without the divisions that are involved right now, without us Christians pointing their fingers, without them feeling that the Christians are pointing their fingers at them, in some hateful way. And that's what we have to come to in our society if we want to heal these wounds that are dividing us, and we need to do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Family friend, and some people are big admirers of his. I know others are not, because he can definitely sometimes be on the liberal side, but he is definitely a longtime family friend. Even spoke at mom's retirement gathering and all in that space is Reverend Barber. And I do know that one of the things that Reverend Barber has talked about is how, unfortunately, a lot of what we should be talking about on our sermons is barely touched at all. Because I think he did a study, or it was revealing a study that talked about the fact that even poverty is not really discussed in a lot of the pulpits, even though definitely that is something that Jesus talked about really a lot, is dealing with the least of these. But I was just wondering, do you think that that is a fair statement that he levels when he is talking about that and his putting out the Poor People's Campaign? Because he does feel that a lot of our churches are not really addressing that particular issue.
I definitely think that's one of the issues that's been dividing us. If you think about it, we've got people in Congress that are supposedly on one side or the other of helping communities that are having, economic difficulties. And if they really wanted to solve this problem, they could have done it 40 years ago. Yeah. Why is it not changed? So it's to their benefit somehow. Unfortunately, I have to say it's to their benefit somehow, because they're not interested in solving the problem. They're interested in getting reelected. So I definitely think he's right in that it ought to be something we not only talk about. When you think about it, back to the Bible again, mm-hmm. He's talking about faith without works is dead.
Right.
You can say you believe, but what are you doing about it? Mm-hmm. When in the garden, God gave Adam and Eve commandments. He said, go do. He didn't say, think about, tending the garden. He didn't say, think about populating the earth. He said, go do it. And when Jesus was there and gave the Great Commission, he didn't say, think about it. He said, go to the ends of the earth and tell them about the gospel. Yeah, and that's what we need to do. Quit talking about it and start doing something about it.
Well, and like you said, do it, and actually do it with action. Because one of the things, and I alluded to his own spiritual journeys, and yes, he has gone to some churches and has had some good relationship with certain churches that he has gone to. But my dad has not always been the most spiritual person in the world, in the sense of being a regular churchgoer, but he is a fairly well-known artist here in the area, and he did a kind of a protest piece, and it was basically using that pulling down symbol that you use if you're getting to pull a fire alarm and everything. And in it was the notion of thoughts and prayers. And that's, I think, the simple words that are in there are thoughts and prayers, because part of what he was noticing was that a lot of people, when people are in trouble, will say that they are giving them thoughts and prayers when sometimes they need an action behind those thoughts and prayers.
Exactly.
So he wasn't not knocking the thoughts and prayers, but he was actually making the statement that sometimes it is empty words.
Right. I agree 100%. We have to stop talking about things and start doing them.
Right.
So this thing with the abortion issue, I'm picking on this one because this is the only one we have a actual position statement on. So we've already talked out the issue. We're on both. We've dealt with both sides of the pro-life and pro-choice. Neither one is a complete solution. So let's get to a correct solution. One of the problems we have is that the people want to set up laws. They think that setting up laws is going to solve problems. They don't. And when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, he put the tree of good and evil in there, knowledge of good and evil in the garden. He didn't have to, he did. And he didn't build a fence around it. Excuse me. He gave them the choice. He said, don't do it, because if you do, you will die. And what he was saying is, if you put things in your mind, which was the knowledge of good and evil, if you put them in your mind, they're going to poison you and it's going to create death. So, but he's giving us a choice, and he's always done that with everything. He's given us free will. He loves us unconditionally. He wants us, the first 4 commandments of the 10 commandments, he wants us to love him the way he loves us. And when we do that, then the rest of the 10 commandments flows out of that. And we love our neighbor because we have to. Once we love him like he loves us, we're going to love our neighbor like he loves them. Yeah. And so it's not complicated. He's given us a choice, and we have to make the choice.
And speaking of those choices, and I definitely want to bring up one of the other guests, and I've got 2 more to bring up, but I definitely want to bring up Di and everything, because Di is actually working in that space of diversity and inclusion. And I do know that a lot of times that is another one of those divisive forces, because we do know that a lot of times people sometimes will use religion in order to say why we should not support people of certain lifestyles or even newer lifestyles, because we've heard the whole conversations around what is allowed or not allowed by the trans community and the LGBTQI community, in addition to the various ethnicities that are out there as well. But Di, you've been listening to part of the conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you are doing in that space of diversity as well.
Where to even begin? I was talking to myself while I was backstage here, and I was thinking, oh, Di, thank God that you went ahead and took that class on philosophy rather than taking, thank God you did that, Di. Here it is. It's coming back around. So, yes. So, like you said, I'm Di. I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also am a writer. I'm a justice advocate. And what I mean by that is my work is very action oriented when we think about sort of how a lot of these conversations that we're having, not necessarily with each other, but rather at each other, are very philosophical in some points. And often I think that we are being divided intentionally in a lot of places. When we have so much more in common than we think. And I think the fun thing is, the more you know, the more you realize that there's overlap, right? So when we think, I hate talking about religion because it is not my deepest puddle here. But when we think about religion, in the Quran, Muslims describe Christians and Jewish folks as people of the book. They do not look down on us in any, so they think of us as also being part of a religion that they respect. I have a lot of folks that are Jewish that are friends of mine that like to joke that the Christian Bible was written in the notes section of the Jewish Bible, because we have the New Testament and the Old Testament. So that's a little joke that we get a little thrown around once in a while. My people, since we're talking about it, are my father's pagan. He came up being rather witchy, actually, in the Northeast in Massachusetts. Actually, I know. I'm sorry, Bill. I don't mean to I'm watching your face go like a little bit.
No,
So
I'm listening carefully.
thank you. So my backpack with regard to all of the work that I do is very sort of diverse in that way as well. But I think my actions are the important thing, right? The awareness of everybody else around me and sort of what they believe allows me to make better choices and take better actions. You got onto, Ukraine a little bit. I have a Ukrainian refugee living with me. I don't go to church all the time. I made this choice because he was in my path. He needed help. He needed to get safe. And he just happened to be in my path. Now, did I do that because of religion or because I believe a certain thing? No, I'm a humanist. I believe that he was there for me to help. And so I took that opportunity to help him. My family, he lives with my family. Like, I'm not necessarily one religion or another. I am pro Christians. I love, true Christians that are there and actually act on their values. I am less of a fan of people that shout down other people without really understanding why they're doing that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Bill, as she was talking, one of the things that I was curious about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, but even within Christianity, there is no doubt that there are some pagan rituals that are within the Christian church. I'm thinking about definitely Christmas, which is many months away since we're only in May right now and everything. And there are even some things around Easter and a number of other things that have some pagan things that have been interwoven in them. And we did see a lot of people that got into new age religions, even during this pandemic and everything, whether that was Eastern religions, whether that was yoga and mindfulness, or a number of other things. So I was just wondering, as one that is very much ingrained in Christianity, do you acknowledge those parts of even your own religion and its own heritage? Because definitely there are some pagan rituals that are even in the Christian church that are very much part of what is considered modern practice.
So earlier, when in our conversation, we talked about the fact that I believe I went through three stages. I'm in my third stage now. And the process before I became a Christian, when I was doing the wrestling part, that process that led me through that, I was still not really a believer at that point. I was, C.S. Lewis called it himself the most reluctant Christian convert, because he didn't want to convert. He wanted to prove that the Bible was wrong, and he looked for ways to do that. And finally he gave up because he couldn't find anything wrong in it. And if you look at the history of the Bible, there's not one archaeological discovery that hasn't confirmed the Bible, not one in history. And there's so many other things like that I could talk about. But the important thing for me is that once I became a Christian, I went through I started a process, which is never going to end. It's called sanctification. And it tells me that I can't judge other people. God told us not to judge other people. It's not my job to judge. My job is to forgive them, to love them unconditionally, and forgive them without limit. In other words, continue to, even when they keep doing something that bothers me or hurts me, I still forgive them. And so I'm going through a sanctification process. I have no idea where everybody else is in their process to God. I can't make that judgment. That's something for God to do. So I have no, if people choose to live in a way that is defiant of God or against God, that's their choice. I'm not going to be, and I don't like laws that come up and try to somehow work on either side of that issue. I don't like any of those laws. I don't think they're necessary. I think we need to just learn to get along as human beings. Each of us flawed. There are no perfect human beings. There are no Christians that I've met that are perfect. None, zero. So I don't think there's perfect people anywhere in the world. I just think we're all in the same battlefield, and we're all trying to get through it with as fewest number of wounds as possible.
I definitely agree with you. I definitely agree with you, because I was having this conversation with another group of folks who are on the other show that I do, the online dinner party and everything, and that's part of what we were talking about. Because I'm not 100% sure that I would want to meet a normal or sane person, because I'm not 100% sure that there are any sane people in the world, because I think we all have a little bit of insanity within us and a little bit of quirkiness within us. So if somebody tells me that they are sane, my red flags are already going up a little bit, because I'm wondering how sane are they to state their own sanity. So that's kind of my own philosophy. I don't know whether Di agrees with me or not, or you
Oh,
agree with me.
100%. I fully agree. I am a little bit insane. I am a mother of 2 young kids. My kids are 7 and 5. I would say I am medium insane. Like, I'm not even just a little bit. Like, ah.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And those kids are probably having all kinds of issues that are causing some of that insanity. And particularly if you are, and I'm not sure if you are, if you're raising them alone, if you're raising them with somebody, then that can even add more to the insanity. I have a dear friend of mine, and I don't know how she's managing, because she is not only a mother of 4, but I want to say she's a grandmother of 5, and I think she just hit 50. So she's already at a fairly young age and is in that single space as well, which brings a whole nother dimension, because we've even had some courtship opportunities, and sometimes that's a whole matter of, do you even want to get involved in those situations and all, because then that's that whole automatic family and automatic grand family and a bunch of other things that can be played into that. And I'm sure that anybody that is quoting her goes through those conversations with themselves.
I have a good husband. I got very lucky in that department.
That's always a good thing, to have those people that are good on your side. And all along those lines, I'm going to bring in the third guest very shortly to talk about that aspect of the conversation as well. But Bill, before I bring in Veronica, and that's the third and final guest on this particular radio show, and all, how much of the lessons that you learned came from other philosophical people? Because I also know that you are a fan of Socrates and a fan of Thomas Aquinas, and definitely they are different aspects of what is going on. I think Thomas was definitely falling in that Christian theology and everything, but Socrates not as much so. So I was just wondering your own thoughts about philosophy and where you first developed this interest in philosophy. So were you like the young kid that was doing that whole pondering thing as a youngster, or did this come much later in life?
It was after I was 40, and I was trying to. The reason I went to the philosophers is because they kind of have. There's one kind of common thread that runs through all of them, and that is know thyself. It is try to understand what is the truth, what is the foundation everything should be built upon, because otherwise you don't have a reality. You have some illusion of what reality is, but it's not reality. And you can build your life on those things, but in the Bible, God says that's like building them on shifting sand. When you've got something that 1 year they tell you this is the right thing to do, and 4 years later they tell you wasn't the right thing, this is the right thing. It's hard to trust those people that keep doing that. Where the Bible has never changed. It's the same foundation from over 2,000 years ago. And what I love about it is that God, he was thinking about us now, because he allowed all the 5,000 scrolls to be hidden in the desert till 1947 and uncovered. And those scrolls were used to compare against the Old Testament to say what's changed, how did they manipulate it, as time went along so they could gain more power? And the answer was zero changed. Mm-hmm. Those original documents are still accurate. The only thing they found different were spelling and punctuation, and it wasn't consistent through all 5,000 because there's many copies of each book. So those were easy to identify because there were some without it, the punctuation, and some with it or spelling, and some spelled correctly. So they were able to find all that stuff out. And that's what I love, is because he never changes. His laws never change. And the key, I wrote a book a year and a half ago called God's Only Law. And the heart of the whole book is very simple. Don't look at all the ordinances. Those were all made by the Pharisees and all kinds of people like that who were trying to control population and gain power and prestige. And don't look at those. Look at the 10 Commandments. And when Jesus came, he took those first 4 and he broke them into one. Love your God. Love God. And then the 6, he broke into love thy neighbor. And then he took one verse and said, love, you can fulfill all of the law in one word: love thy neighbor. So it's really about love. That's what it, if we would just love each other the way God loves us, we wouldn't need any laws, zero, because no one would be hurting anybody else, either physically or emotionally or mentally or anything else. We wouldn't be putting them in prisons or anything else, not prisons, physical prisons, but prisons in their own lives, because you can have somebody torment you and make you a prisoner in your own body. And none of that would happen if everybody loved everybody else.
And
So
speaking of love, I'm going to bring in Veronica, because one of the things that I have noticed in the world, unfortunately, is that sometimes the differences in religion and religious philosophy can be one of the biggest detriments to relationships and everything. Because I have seen, and this is just my opinion, and you can disagree, Bill, and definitely the two ladies can disagree. That's part of the conversation that we have here, is we allow disagreement. But it does seem to me that some pastors, I'm not saying all, almost give a double standard where they are very much about kind of shop around, to borrow a old R&B song for the gentleman, and then they want the women to be pure as driven snow. And I'm going like, aren't those diametrically opposed messages? But that is kind of the message that comes from quite a few churches, and I'm going like, that seems diametrically opposed, because how are you telling one to go and to find as many folks as you can and shop around and do all of that stuff, and you tell the other ones to like be this purity version? I'm going like, those don't quite work together. But that's just what I've seen in some of the things. And I've also seen some people that use religion within the relationship space, because I have definitely there's this I'll just put it bluntly, there's this pleasure and guilt pleasure that goes on, because definitely we as humans are intimate, and we can be very much intimate, and definitely even the religious folks can be very much intimate as well. And then they enjoy the intimacy, and then immediately after the intimacy, they go into this like, do we have to get married now, or this whole other kind of like guilt trip that goes on as well. So Veronica, that's just some of my observations of particularly relationships from a Christian standpoint, having dated a few women that are in that space, and even had some that have tried to have their I wanted to say their prophets, but some of the people that are in their church family try to push you toward marriage, because that's of course what a lot of folks are thinking that you should be doing in the first place. But Veronica, you're the relationship coach, to help us out.
Yeah, it's a very tricky subject for sure, I think, for most people. And yeah, so in my work, what I really have discovered is that one of the biggest problems really is that we, for example, let's say talk about religion, we came from kind of like an unhealthy space where people had to get married, they wanted to enjoy, they wanted to love, and so they felt kind of like pressure to marry super young. But now we are at the opposite, where there's no rules. I think a lot of young people think that you should have sex really early, you should just be promiscuous, that's like a good thing. And they cannot talk about feelings. They have usually like very bad experiences first, and then of course we have the whole porn industry, which is like quite intense. So in my opinion, I really love to coach people around how to have marriages that are connected and also committed, and where we can actually have some emotional intimacy. But yeah, you need to learn those skills to actually have it. But I think also that all the science really shows that most people, they really thrive when they are in those committed and safe and loving relationships.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. Hey, Bill, I know the other thing that people sometimes forget about marriage is that even though it is definitely in the Bible, a lot of times people forget and I hate to put this particularly with two lovely ladies on here, one that I know is married because she just told me that, and the other one I don't know what their status is and all of that space, but there is definitely a contractual aspect even within the Bible of marriage, and sometimes people forget that aspect as well, because definitely there was that whole contractual, whether it is about love, which is what I think it should be about, but even within the Bible there is a lot of it being I hate to put it this way, but a business deal. In a lot of ways it was a business deal for a lot of folks as well and everything. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that.
okay, you
Yeah.
asked a lot of questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you asking me? Who were you asking, Mark?
I was anybody that wants to take it. I was throwing it to you, Bill, but Don may have some thoughts as well.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you asked a lot of questions there. And, if you look at the Bible, there are plenty of opportunities to have discussions about marriage in the Bible. It's just Jesus himself, when he met the woman at the well, he told her she had 5, he asked her first, bring your husband and I'll give him some of this living water. And she said, I don't have a husband. And he said, you're telling the truth. You've had 5 husbands and the man you're living with now is not your husband. But the interesting thing about the way Jesus handled that is, I think he's trying to teach us a lesson when he's doing this. He did not accuse her of anything. He just stated the facts, and he showed her that he was going to love her no matter what the situation was. She then took it, understanding that this is a Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman, which was not really allowed from either side back then. She realized who he was from the things he told her, and she immediately went into town and told everybody that this man is the Messiah. He accepted her, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. We have to stop putting labels and judging other people. We have to let people come to God because he loves them. That's the whole heart of it. And everything else we do is just another form of dividing us, which we talked about earlier, Mark. Mm-hmm. And we have to stop dividing each other. We're not supposed to judge other people. They're supposed to make their own decisions.
Hey, Di,
I don't know if that answers what you asked.
No, that definitely did. Di, along those same conversation points and everything, I do know that there has been a tremendous amount of conversations over the last years, even before the pandemic, around diversity and inclusion and making sure that all aspects of society are represented, whether that's in the corporate world, whether that's in the media, or whether that's in a number of other avenues. I mean, we saw a whole conversation about representation involving the trans community with what happened with Dylan McVeigh. I think I totally mispronounced his name and all in that space, but y'all know what I'm talking about in that way. But how much of the diversity question are you satisfied with, and are we doing a good enough job in making sure that we are representing a lot of industries? I've even had some friends that have told me that why do we need to have HBCUs in the 21st century, even though we do know that historically they were needed because there was not enough avenues of advancement into certain communities by the African-American population. So they were definitely needed at their creation. I would even argue that they are still needed to this day because there are still some fields that it's not as easy to get into, say, a Harvard as it is a Howard and all in that space. But I'm just wondering your thoughts as one that is in that diversity lane.
So I would say that when we think about representation, the important thing to remember is that what we're trying to show is that somebody is normal for the person that they are. So it's very difficult if you are coming up a certain way, if you are coming up around, traditionally straight folks in a heteronormative culture, in a culture that's constantly telling you you need to seek out these things. These are the only things that you want in your life. Anything else is completely wrong. And what we're seeing is huge suicide rates, huge murder rates, huge. And what we're trying to do with these movements is show that it's okay to be that. Being different than the main narrative does not necessarily mean that you are in any way not sharing the same values. I mean, Bill and I might be on very different ends of the spectrum religiously, but I would say that we probably have a ton in common in terms of our values. So when we think about why HBCUs still need to exist, you have in one of our states somebody who's trying to make it illegal for public schools to spend money on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What we cannot do is rewrite the history that we are uncomfortable with. The entire point of religion, the entire point of philosophy is to know yourself and know your relationship with the things that matter to you. We are not here to right the wrongs of the past by ignoring them. We are not here to remove other people from the story, remove other people from the narrative. We should be able to tell the story and tell it the way it happened so that we can learn from it, so that we don't repeat our mistakes, so that we can see how things that were written thousands of years ago can still have impact on our lives today. We don't have that now. We have the bite-sized marketing version of here's what Christianity is, here's what Judaism is, here's what that is, here's what you believe, here's what she believes, here's what they believe. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but seriously, Dylan, all she did was, all Bud Light did was send her a can that had her picture on it. And look what happened. And why did that happen? That happened because we decided we were going to get up in our feelings. Oh, Bud Light can't do that. Bud Light doesn't care whether or not you throw away your Bud Light after you buy it. Like, that's not what we're here for. We have bigger problems than this. But what we have people focused on is our divisions. What we have people focused on is our this is what makes them, they're different, so they're bad, they're after your children. And it keeps the cycle going back to when we think about they still need to raise money in Congress and all of those things. It's much easier to control the direction that people are going if you keep them afraid of the other side, right? If you continuously say this other side wants to come after your children, this other side believes this, who's stopping to say, wait, is that right? Are liberals really out to groom children, or is that just something that's being said to me? Is that just something that's being spoon-fed to me? So these are two different questions. Why do HBCUs still need to exist? Because their culture is important and they deserve to be part of their own story. Why shouldn't we be rewriting history? Because that has never in the history of ever worked. Like that, in the history of humankind, that always leads to terrible outcomes. That's why everybody should be part of the American story. Everybody should be part of the world story. It's not hurting people. We can find our way to where we're going without having to demonize and make the other side evil.
Definitely a good point. And this is actually, I'd love to hear both everybody's thoughts on this. But another thing that was crossing my mind as you were mentioning that is that some of the things that we are dealing with, and now there are some core principles that we know have always been the same one, no matter what was going on. Definitely the Bible talks about thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not rob, and robbery and murder have been going on since the beginning of time and everything. But there are newer things that are taking place that were not able to be addressed because they are newer things that are there in society. I'm thinking about like some of the things and developments that are going on with AI and computers and a number of other things. Those were nowhere in the mind of those in the biblical times, as far as we know, even though some people are still trying to figure out how those pyramids were made in Egypt in terms of their engineering feat and all in that space. And it's the same for some of the things in Latin America, like with the Incans and some of the other folks. But outside of that and the possibility of there might have been knowledge that we are not aware of and all in that space, how much are all three of you concerned that some of the interpretations are not putting into enough consideration the modern day facts of life and the modern day changes in the society? Because we definitely went from agricultural to industrial to computer, and a lot of this was not in the time of Jesus and Moses and the other figures within the Bible.
You're throwing it out to everybody?
I'll throw it to everybody, but if you want to tackle it, go for it.
My concern with AI is that it needs to have everybody in the room while it's developed, right? We can't just be like, I can give you a very succinct example. The problem when we are developing AI, something like facial recognition software, if we are using facial recognition software that's been developed by only one group of people and can't view Black faces, and yet we are selling it to the police, how does that have an immediate impact on people of color, right? So my biggest problem with AI is that we are going too fast and not taking everybody into account as we develop it.
Yeah. Well, Veronica, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because the other thing that I've heard about AI, and definitely Bill, we'll hear from you as well, but some people are concerned that AI is taking the human element even out of relationships. I was in another room earlier today in one of our other shows, and they were talking about that there are literally people that are creating AI tools that almost take that physical touch out of things and all in that space. So as a relationship coach, I'm sure that you have run across folks that are seeing this kind of communication going on, or even lack of communication. Because one of the things that frustrates me is one, I probably go and eat out way too much just because of my own uh, habits with cooking and all in that space. But sometimes when I'm out and about, I'll see couples that are supposedly out on a date, and I'm going like, but they're also on their phone devices. I'm going like, wait a minute, aren't y'all supposed to be engaging with each other? But y'all are engaging with 100 other people in the world or whoever they're communicated to on their devices. But I just wondered your thoughts about kind of the disconnect that is going on as well.
Yeah, I have actually an interesting story about this in my own life. So, maybe ChatGPT, it's this big AI thing that just launched, and I've been using it in my business, to help me with creative ideas and stuff. And at some point, I realized, because I felt a bit lonely working from home, all that stuff, that I used it as an assistant. And I was saying like, "Thank you, how are you?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's literally happening," because it talks to you like it's a human being. And luckily, like, my social skills are really developed. Like, for example, I only actually have friends that when we meet, we put the phone down. That's very, very important to me. But my generation kind of like, when I got a cell phone, I was maybe like 14. But with young kids, and especially I think if parents are not really conscious about it, it could really be that they basically don't develop any social skills. And then when we go even deeper, because now they're talking a lot about, for example, also making like robots, to maybe relate to, or also, like sex robots and stuff. And if I can talk about this topic, it's just on my mind because my husband is really conscious about this. Is also, for example, the porn, because people are really afraid to relate because it's painful. They made bad experiences, and so they are escaping into this online world. And I think that's one of the biggest things, because like, fast food doesn't really fill you up. It doesn't really give you what you're craving for. And the problem is the more time you spend, the less you can train your skills. And for example, what I do with my clients, I really teach them how to be uncomfortable, because that's one of the most important things. If we want to actually, live a fulfilled life, we have to learn to be more uncomfortable, and that it's okay, that it's normal. If you're going to first 10 dates, it's going to be weird. You're maybe going to say like things that are not so clever, but the more you do it, the more you relax into it, and then you can become a master at it. So I would always encourage all young people that they train this ability to be uncomfortable, and then they can, challenge themselves and really do the things they want to do. So that's what I see with AI, and I want to encourage people to create like a positive relationship with it, because I don't think it's necessarily all bad, but it's like a new skill that we have to learn.
Nope, I definitely agree with you on that. And one of the things I know is that I have two nephews, no kids of my own, but I do have those two nephews. And I want to say it was when they were about 12 or 11, because they'll be 14 and 15, that they got those lovely Oculus sets. And sometimes I'd be going like, wait a minute, are y'all in y'all's own little world? Because they definitely, literally would be in their own little world. And sometimes this is being totally separated from the family and all in that space. So while I was glad that they were learning a new skill and enjoying themselves playing some of the games, there were sometimes I was concerned that maybe they weren't engaging as much with the family as they probably could have been, because they were so absorbed in that game and all in that space. So how much of those conversations, Veronica, do you have to have even on that family level? Because I do know that there are all these new toys, and sometimes the kids are loving the new toys, begging for the new toys, whether they're getting that from their grandmas or grandparents or getting it from family members or whatever. We do know that sometimes that temptation is to give them the new toy, and that may not always be the most beneficial things.
Yeah, so I don't have kids yet, but I think a lot about parenting because I just got married and we want to have kids soon. And what I really think is that I think it's so important that you have a really good relationship, because I actually am not such a big fan of control, because I think that every human has like this, everyone wants to be free, right? We also want to do the things that we enjoy. But I think that the most important thing is the relationship, because if you have a trust-filled relationship with your kids, if you make sure that they are really happy, that they get all their needs met, I do think that they also have a natural urge, to play outside, to connect with people and all that. And very often I think parents focus too much on like screen time or harsh rules, not understanding that maybe I have so many clients that have memories like in their childhood they were so stressed and unhappy and lonely, so they watched a lot of TV. That's how they tried to regulate their nervous system, you know? So the problem here not would have been to say, oh, you have to watch less TV. It's like, why do you have this urge to watch so much TV? What's going on, you know? So I would always like investigate with the children. And of course, I also understand that many of those programs are meant to be addictive and all that stuff. But still, I do think the most important thing is actually this loving relationship with the kids and being like their kind of like their coach, because life is very complicated, you know, especially modern life. So it's almost like being their guide, helping them through this maze. But maybe I would love to also know, Di, because you are a mother, but your kids are kind of like in that age, or
You know, honestly, that depends. So my kids have ADHD. So the way that we think about screens is more in the stimulation aspect than it is almost anything else. So like you were saying, when I was a child, you know, in the 90s, we had a lot of TV. Like we would come home right after school and we would watch like all kinds of, you know, cartoons and everything, and that would be just part of everything, right? It was a big part of the culture, well, watching TV together. But as I have children of my own, there are a lot of folks that are like, oh, you should only do this much screen time or this much this and this much. I am also not very big on control. I am not in the sense that I don't monitor them or keep track of what we're watching or any of that sort of thing. I am not setting a timer for 20 minutes to make sure that they're only getting 20 minutes. Like, you know, it's just a lot of I make sure that they watch educational programming. They love PBS. They love to watch little math shows. And I'm just like, I'm not here to judge other parents. Like, I'm not here to like, carry on, moms. Like, you know what I mean? Like, go pay attention to what they're watching. Keep involved, keep talking, keep those conversations going. I'm not here to judge. That's not what I do.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Bill, along those same lines, do you ever worry about AI moving into the religious field? Because I could literally see a day where you could go to churches and not need to see the pastor, because the pastor might literally be some hologram or some other figure that is over there giving the service and all in that space. And definitely we did see a lot of Zoom services. So I guess that would be the next variation of that going on. So are you worried that there could be a day and time where the message is coming from AI instead of from that physical human touch that has been such an important part of the history of religion?
Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you that my degree was in computer sciences. So my goal was, and what we were told back then, this was a long time ago now, 1970, to help free us from the routine parts of life so we could spend more time together in community. The whole idea was we would be more personal with each other. We would have more, get rid of the mundane things and let the computers or the robots we would create do those things, and we would spend more time together. But when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, we spent a lot of time. We didn't have AI back then, so we spent a lot of time talking to each other and disagreeing with each other, so that we could understand that we could disagree and we don't have to hate each other. We could still be nice to each other. We could still respect each other, and it's okay to disagree. And but when back then we also learned that you can actually learn. So you have a disagreement with somebody, but you walk away from it and you have learned something, which will change your opinions for the future. And that's what I think the reasoning with God phase of my life is all about, is that I'm learning things, and I'm not learning it just from the Bible. I'm learning it from other people, from people that don't know anything about the Bible, that I'm helping as they're reading the Bible so they can understand it. I'm learning too, because they have a different perspective. They're bringing new thoughts and new patterns to my mind. But the point back to the AI, so that's what I was expecting. But now, after all these years, I would be happy if we would start disconnecting from AI. I think it's taking away. We have isolated so many people from the normal community life that provides a healthy environment, and isolated them in a position where they can be attacked virtually. Because now all of a sudden, if you were talking to somebody and you disagreed with them face to face, it's one thing, but now they're doing it and they're mean and hateful. And there's a lot more suicides now than there were back when I was little. And I think that's part of the reason they've isolated themselves. So I'm probably, you know, I'm a computer science major that would say we need less of that and more getting together and, you know, having my daughter has 2 children, so I have grandchildren. They have dinner together at the table. There's no phones or laptops or anything there, or iPads. They talk, and you know, they don't have to communicate all the time. They can just listen to the other people talking. But whatever they do, they're getting a chance to do that, and they spend a lot of time talking about things. So I'm a big fan of having less, and I also agree with Di that I don't like a lot of rules and regulations and those kinds of things. And I think Veronica also touched on that. I think we need to allow them to have an environment when they're together with the adults in their lives that is a joyful experience. So when we're with our grandkids, they'll get up early, 6:30 in the morning, and we'll have a business meeting. I'll have a business meeting with the 2 of them, and we'll talk about things. And whatever they talk about, I eventually lead it into a way to try to say how they can learn from the truth in the Bible about that issue, whatever it was. And they'll learn about interest rates. I mean, they're 10 and 12, but they'll learn about interest rates. They'll learn about what's going on in politics. They'll learn about all kinds of things, but it's a chance to talk where they get to express their opinions. And you know what? This is what I learned. These kids are really smart. Kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And we talk down to them, and shouldn't do that. They're smart. We should listen to what they have to say and let them be part of the conversation so they can feel validated. And then they'll spend less time on their machines when they're around you and their parents and whoever is giving them that. I see Veronica likes that. Yeah. So I'm on the AI situation. You know, I loved programming and debugging and all that. It was really fun doing all that stuff. But if we're not going to use it to free us up to have more social contact, if it's going the other direction, we need to do something about that.
No, I definitely agree with you. As you were saying that, I was thinking of a couple of things. One, I was remembering those days of the computers when they literally took up a room, and now we've got these simple phones that have got the power of some of those massive computers that were back during that day. Because I definitely remember some of those computers and going into classrooms where they were literally using floppy disk and other things that the kids today these days have no idea what those are at all in that space. So I was thinking about that. But you also mentioned something that some people may be surprised at and everything, because in sometimes our institutions, whether that's the government or church institutions or a number of other institutions, can be the ones that are the biggest fans of rules. And I'm definitely one that thinks that sometimes the rules have to be altered and sometimes the rules have to be changed. So I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this, because one of the things that, even when it comes to diversity and inclusion, where I sometimes get a little bit concerned with some of our institutions, is we're not given enough of those voices. Because I do know for a while in certain parts of the Christian church, not all of the aspects, but certain parts of the Christian church, they weren't even allowing women in leadership roles and all in that space. So just wondering, do we sometimes need to move with the times, particularly if the times need to be changed in that sense? So I was just wondering, sometimes we need to bend the rules just the way that John Lewis called when he talked about good trouble. And he was definitely breaking the rules with some of the things that he was doing with Martin Luther King and other folks. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about, do we sometimes need to adapt to the times that we are in?
Me? You want me for that?
Yeah, go for it, Don.
I figured. I had met John Lewis. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and he was just such a dynamic presence. He was actually only a little taller than me at the time, but like, he was on fire. And so I like that people still quote his good trouble. You know, the very important thing to remember about rules is the fact that women did not just come into being in 1950. Like, that wasn't like, we've all right. So like, that's the thing that I struggle with the most, is when we're not seeing women in these roles, when we're not seeing Black folks in these roles, when we're not seeing, you know, Latinos, Latinas, and people of Asian descent in these roles. It's like we've all been here for hundreds of years at this point. Why are we still having this conversation? I would love for us to catch up and let everybody be part of these institutions that we have. And if they don't fit for people, then we need to change the institutions. I don't think we need to hold on to something that doesn't work for us, that doesn't promote our values or who we are as people. And I am hoping that the younger generations, we're seeing it already, will sort of throw off these pieces that they don't like, that aren't for us, and make them better. I am hoping that with more and more people growing up in this day and age, we will be able to adapt things to be more human, to have more love in them. So yes, we do need to adapt. We need to let go of the, oh no, only one type of person can have an opinion on something. It's like, oh no, there's all these people here, y'all.
And along those same lines, both you and Bill mentioned, and even Veronica did to some degree, the young folks. Well, one, I think that they have a tremendous resilience. I've been really admiring what they have accomplished in a lot of different fields, whether that's environmental, whether that's Black Lives Matter, whether that's civil rights, whether that's a number of other issues that they have been involved in and everything. But the other time, and definitely Bill alluded to it, they have gone through so much. Like I said, I was born in 62 and my nephews were born in 2008 and 2009 respectively, and all in that space. And I'm just thinking to myself that if I had gone through what folks that had born through 6 years before them, like 2001, I don't know where my mindset would be, because you would have gone through, let's say you were born in the fall of 2001, you would have gone through a attack on the United States. You would have gone through several wars. You would have gone through a pandemic. You would have gone through some natural stuff that is, in terms of natural disasters, that is taking place, like Katrina and a number of other things that I'm going like, and some turbulent politics, both locally and nationally and internationally. And I'm going like, good grief, how have they not gone crazy during this time frame? So the fact that there is this rise in their mental situations and their mental health does not surprise me, based on the amount of things that folks have gone through in this last couple of decades. I'm not saying that there weren't other turbulent decades, but this just seems crazy ridiculous to me. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I'll start with you, Veronica, because you're in that relationship space, and I do know that definitely I'm not that far removed from that age range as well. But I'm just wondering, how have your thoughts about the youth and what they have gone through, and how it is even played into some of the relationship developments that are going on as well?
Yeah, so I think about it a lot because all relationship issues always start in childhood. So I think a lot about parenting and childhood experiences. And it's really interesting because when I talk to my grandmother, and I'm from Germany originally, but I know the US quite well, just culturally, she is always confused why the new generation has so many problems. Because in her mind, we have it so good. We have everything materially possible. We have so many opportunities, right? We have so many rights. We are very free, but the problem with modern age is that it is, first of all, so overwhelming. I mean, so much choice, like the evolution has just not come up to it. Our brains have not caught up to it. It's so confusing. It's very complicated, but also a lot of social structures are just falling away, and kids need resources. That's why like big families are so beautiful actually for children, because if your mom and dad are, not are stressed, not there for you, or just bad parents, you have a lot of other resources, aunts, uncles, family members, neighbors that you could go to. And kids today are very, very isolated. So that's the one issue. And then the other issue, of course, is media. I mean, its effects on the brains has not been studied at all. And I would also say, on a more spiritual level, I really believe that as each generation comes in, they get more sensitive and more sensitive. And I truly also believe that our path is very much to heal the family trauma, because every generation brings something in. And of course, for example, in Germany, we were so influenced from the Second World War and all these atrocities. And I tell you, I do so much emotional healing work, and it's so much about this time that has been brought forth. And so the next generations are more sensitive. And they are really, I feel like they are facing like a spiritual crisis really deeply. But that's why I'm super passionate about really helping them with mindfulness and a lot of emotional intelligence. So yeah, it's like an opportunity, but a really big challenge for them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, along those same lines, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Veronica, and everything. There have been a lot of folks that have looked at the church community and the church family, and a lot of times when you go to the churches, unless they are there with their parents who have kind of like guiding them in there, there's been a decrease in youth involvement within particularly organized religion and everything. So I was wondering, is that something that is of concern to you as one that has studied religion and has gone on your own religious journey? I know that you are doing some very positive things with your grandkids, and definitely probably did with your kids as well. And I know that there are things that are geared toward the kids. Like I remember a friend of mine that was actually one of the young ladies that I was dating at one point was very much involved in watching Veggie Tales, and I know Veggie Tales is still out there. That kind of gives you that cartoon version of the books that are in the Bible and everything. But I'm just wondering, is there enough of a push to get youth involved in the church, and is that a concern of yours if there is not?
I would say it's not a concern. Because I believe in God, and I believe that God has already seen everything that's going to happen in the future and knows when he needs to step in. So in 1970s, I was not aware of the Jesus revival that was happening. I missed that whole thing. It happened and I didn't even know it happened. But now I'm seeing, I haven't watched the movie that came out recently, but I am seeing different places where I'm seeing revival happening again in young people. So young people are saying, we're tired of this. Let's see how I would phrase it. I'm not exactly sure how I would phrase it, but a world without God maybe is the way I would phrase it. And they're tired of it, and they don't believe some of the stories that they're being told, and they want to find out, just as I was curious when I turned past 40, I wanted to find out the truth. They're trying to find out the truth, and there are plenty more opportunities for them to find out the truth now than there ever were when I was growing up. So no, I'm not worried. I think that the truth is the truth. They will find it, and God will figure out a way to get it to them. So I'm not worried about it. And I like the youth that I'm around, that I've seen. I'm excited about them. I think they're awesome. So no, I'm not worried.
Yeah, I definitely think that they have got a very powerful voice and definitely have seen a lot of very powerful messages that they are putting out and everything in that space and all along those lines. So, but I do sometimes get concerned about their mental health, and you kind of alluded to it, as did Di and everything. So what are some of the ways that we can address some of these things that are going on, even in the relationship space when it comes to that mental health? Because definitely, as one of you mentioned, the suicide rates have been up among our youth, and they've definitely lashed out in other ways. So Veronica, what are some of the things that you are hoping that you will see, even if when you have your own kids and everything, and just in general with some of the folks that you are coaching?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to do with young people is to really deeply connect with them and to respect their experience. I think one of you guys said this. I really love that. Yeah, to really respect. How are they feeling? What do they want to do with their life? Because what I see a lot is that we have kind of like a very commanding way to talk to children. We kind of like talk top down to them, and I really want to raise free people. So I want to have an attitude of respect in my house, but respect to everybody, And the other thing is also to have this real deep connection, because we are really raised in our culture to never really see into someone else, to kind of like, I always teach my clients, like, okay, look at me, but look deeply, can you feel my heart? What am I feeling? And everyone has this capacity, because we are social beings, we're a social species. So we have tremendous emotional skills, but we got to develop this. And I think with children, you can do this from just such a young age on, but you should really want to know what is going on for them on a deep level, not just kind of like, are they performing well, because usually when all these troubles happen, that they maybe get bad marks in school, everything, it's already too late, So, but of course, there is also a lot of parental trauma. And that often, for example, when we talk about suicide with young kids, I mean, that's very often, or yeah, it is always the case, because a depression or something doesn't come out of nowhere, no? So there is often just the adults around. And for example, I find it a little bit disappointing in schools that there's not more like safety measures, because schools could be such a great place that teachers could actually realize, oh my gosh, there's something really wrong with a child, because it's very obvious, maybe they cut themselves, maybe they're not eating, maybe they just look really terrible, because we need to really catch it like really soon, but yeah, it's a very, very deep topic.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, Di, along those same lines, and you're a mom and everything, how much of this conversation do you have with your own kids and everything? Because I do know that even here on the network Pod TV, one of the things that both Nick and Kim oftentimes talk about, and they're the two founders of the network, is their frustration with the education system, because they think that there are a lot of issues, whether that's the economic issues that are out there, including Social Security about to go broke and everything, or even some of the vocational things that are not being taught enough of and all in that space, and even some of the history things that are taught in kind of a warped way. It's kind of like the Cliff Notes version where you get the heroes even of the civil rights struggle. So you get to learn about Malcolm and Martin, but not as much about say W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and everything along those lines. So how much would you like to see a more inclusive education? And I know that then this may surprise even Bill, but I know that there's supposed to be a separation of church and state, but maybe even incorporating some of the things that are within the Bible in some of the religion and some of the courses that are taught, maybe in some of the more advanced courses. I don't know that we need to bring that as early as the grade schools and everything, but I'm just wondering your thoughts as a parent.
So I'm going to answer a slightly adjacent question here. When I think about my children's mental health, the thing that is most crucial to it is how I show up.
Right.
So, and what I mean by that is I need to deal with my trauma. I need to show them that I'm a person. We need to have that vocabulary between myself and them, so that when if I, for example, am feeling burned out because I have ADHD as well, as you can clearly tell, when I am feeling burned out and I need to like sit in the dark in my room and sort of recharge myself, I explain what I'm doing to them. I let them know. I'm not here to hide it from them. I'm here to say, hey, Mama's having one of those days where I just have to like stop everything and relax and calm down my brain because I'm feeling overstimulated. And then my eldest, who's 7, he'll be like, oh, okay. And that is so crucially important, because he is going to run into those feelings himself, and he needs to understand how to talk about them and how to advocate for himself. So it's not like we're going to have this magical sprinkle sauce that's going to fall down from the heavens and land on children. What's going to happen is we, the adults, need to be able to self-reflect, heal our own traumas, and parent from that place. Because I will give you an example. The way that I parent around my trauma matters. So I live beside the ocean. I don't swim in the ocean because I'm scared of sharks. We all live beside the ocean, my children also. Do I want to pass on my fears to them? I don't. But what's happening? I am not swimming in the ocean. They are seeing me not swimming in the ocean, and my avoidance behavior is creating a fear in them of the unknown. It doesn't even have to do with the fact that it is about sharks for me. It's about avoidance for them, right? So how I behave, even in my avoiding behavior, impacts the people that they will become. And I didn't realize that early on. So my way of parenting I guess it's called gentle parenting. Really what I'm doing is intentional parenting. And I am teaching that to them so that they can also do the same thing and advocate for the students around them. So how I feel about their schools, I live in Massachusetts. I love our schools. I wish that we weren't injecting so many political ideologies and fighting so many political battles where we need to be educating. But how I feel about their mental health is that I need to be mentally well to help them to you can't be what you can't see. If I'm not showing them how to be mentally healthy or how to talk about being unwell, they don't know how to talk about that, right? So that's what I'm doing when it comes to my kids and mental health.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I hear that. One of the other things I was curious about with your work and everything, Di, is one of the other conversations I've had on the network is people will look at certain institutions, they will see that they are predominantly filled with a certain ethnicity, and they will think that that is enough, and then they will give me some pushback when I'm like, no, that's not quite enough, because I definitely believe in this notion of leveling the playing field, and I've even used that analogy and everything in that space, because people will say take an NFL or an NBA. There's no doubt that the majority of the players are African American and all in that space. And when I have conversations with certain people, they will basically give you the idea that that should be enough, even though we know that there are some coaches that are African American. Like I said, I went to school with Doc, even though who knows, he might not be a coach on another day or two after that.
I love Doc. I'm a big fan. You ever tell I'm a big fan.
Yes, definitely Doc is hoping will maintain that job, and he's definitely one that will speak out, which is one of the things that I like about him as well. But definitely there are coaches that are in the African American field space, but there are not a lot of ownership. Matter of fact, I think there may be like very
That's your
little
problem
part.
right there. Isn't that enough? Is it enough? Who owns the teams?
Right.
Who owns the, like, yes, we have, it's like exactly the same as the workforce, right? We have plenty of workers that are at one level that are Black or Asian or Hispanic or any of those things. But who owns those corporations? Who is benefiting off of the labor?
Right.
That would be those people all have a very specific look about them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, isn't it enough? No, not really, because what we're doing is we're arguing for the crumbs when really we should be focused on dismantling things that oppress the people around us. We don't need to fight for we don't have to fight for these little table crumbs. We need to have the discussions about why it still looks like this. Who's this benefiting? And again, this is the same thing when we talk about like divisive politics and all of that stuff. It's hey, look, he's taking your cookie, rather than why are there only 2 cookies? You know, like what are we doing? You know?
I agree with you on that.
That's
And
not what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say, you know, take all the cookies and only give one to the poor. Like literally, I cannot when it comes to like, especially when people are having that conversation about Christianity being the only religion. I'm like, you had better be the type of person that's feeding the poor then. You had better be the type of person that would go into a market and flip a table. You had better be that type of person if you want to be a fan of Jesus. Because me, I'm a fan of Jesus. So.
yeah. And what do you say in that same situation with the whole notion of women's pay? Because I do know that that's something else that I'm shocked that in 2023 the rate of pay for women is where it's at, and I'm going like they make up more than 50% of the population, and yet they are still making like some ridiculous amount to the dollar and all in that space. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and also Veronica as a lady on the panel, as to the notion of equal rights, particularly for women, and all in that way. Because I'm thinking even in the coaching space, y'all may not be making equal amount, and I think even on certain public speaking platforms as well. But Di, what is your thoughts here in the diversity and inclusion conversation?
I think when you have that conversation with leaders, what you end up hearing is, oh, well, you know, the guy needs to make that money because he has a family. But when you see that like the woman might be a single mother, it's like, that doesn't link together. You know what I mean? Like if you have a single mother who also needs to be supporting a family, we don't feel the same way about it. So when you're talking about women, that's only white women that are making like 75 cents on a dollar. When you look down, you're starting to see that for Black women, it's closer to like 50%. Then that's a problem. That's something that we are holding in place because we are thinking specific narratives that aren't necessarily helpful for anybody. We are still holding on to these sort of racist belief systems, and misogyny, and in particular misogynoir. So racism, misogynoir affects Black women in a very specific way, and has a lot to do with why we feel like we need to keep people in place. But again, this is divisiveness. This is intentional. This is these narratives that are so drummed into our society have a very strong hold on keeping the status quo the way that it is. And what I would like to see more of is understanding between people. Is, oh, if this person needs the same money that this dad needs, then I can connect those dots together in my mind. But for some reason we still aren't, because we again aren't reaching out across to understand the other people. And it's the same thing that we've been talking about 1,000 times, right? Like, it's that not understanding, it's not having those conversations, it's not knowing anybody who is unlike ourselves.
And a lot of those same things, Veronica, one of the things that I remembered, and it still went on, it went on during the pandemic with the vaccine. It definitely went on here in North Carolina with the so-called bathroom bill and a couple of other things that have been out there. Is in that same communication space, we have this habit of liking the silos that we stay in, and we like those silos, and people go against the silo, then we will automatically divorce them. Because I can think of many a person that pretty much divorced their friends because they were, to Bill's point, opposite of them on the viewpoint. So versus having the attitude that we can agree to disagree, they'd be like, nope, you are totally against my side, so therefore I can no longer be your friend. And I'm going like, that doesn't sound conducive to any sort of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship relationship. But I was just wondering your thoughts. Have we gotten into this notion of my way or the highway just in life in general? Because I've even seen that in certain relationships where people will have their non-negotiables, is what they call them. They will have their non-negotiables, and a lot of times those non-negotiables, sometimes they make sense because they can be things that are important to your values. Like you said, if you are of a certain religious belief and you don't think that you can live with somebody of another religious belief, I might be able to understand that. Even though I do have a friend that is very much Christian, and her boyfriend, now husband, is very much Islamic, and they seem to be doing quite well as a couple and all in that space. But I'm just wondering, have we gotten into these non-negotiable attitudes in a lot of things, whether that's relationships, whether that's political views, whether that's a number of other things, and is that been a detriment to some of our growth as a society?
Yeah, I think it was one of the things during the pandemic that most broke my heart to see it. And even in my own family, like, there was a real big divide. And for example, I really learned that keeping the relationship is so much more important than having to be right, because that is one of the issues, I think, is wanting to be right. But I think at the heart of it actually is fear. People get intensely like when the fear is so strongly activated, like their nervous system can't handle it, and then they start to like attack others. So I think one of the most important things, if we actually want to be mature adults, because everything we have seen in the pandemic was not mature, right? It was coming from this like space of survival, because people felt so incredibly threatened. But I think often when they would think then 2 years ahead was that, oh my gosh, how did I behave? It was crazy. And to me, it always shows that the nervous system has not been developed yet. But the pandemic was an extreme situation, but it happens also, for little things like in the workspace with like colleagues, with friends. If we don't have this capacity to actually know what to do with our fear, we can get into those moments that we would break off a relationship just because something really triggers us, So it's one of the most important things to really learn, especially now when things get so kind of like, it gets more and more and more intense. Life gets more intense. People really have different ideas about the future and what to do. But for me, I really grew during the pandemic, like, so strongly. Now it's like I have so much like compassion for other people, and I can really, it's almost like you have to be able to hold it, someone else's perspective, and not feel like threatened by it, and always know that usually when they come on very strong, it's just because of their own fear. And I always teach my clients to see them as like little scared children. How would you then interact with someone? And then usually you feel a lot of compassion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely think that compassion is very much an important part of the conversation. Veronica, the other thing I was curious about that I saw, during the pandemic, and I'd love to hear definitely you and I and even Bill's thoughts about this. A lot of people during the pandemic started to reassess themselves on a lot of different levels. So they started going into a lot of mindfulness, a lot of yoga, a lot of other things because they were in their house. So they started going on these kind of reassessment journeys, and that's the only way that I can describe it. And some of that reassessment journey was also reassessing the notion of relationships, because I don't know that I have seen as many as I did during the pandemic, and some have actually seemed to have managed to work. Now, whether they work in the long run, only time will tell, and time usually will tell all of these factors. But I do know, because we were all isolated and a lot of times in our own houses, a lot of people got involved in Clubhouse, Facebook, and a number of other social media sites. So I would argue that there was even a rise in long distance relationships during this pandemic, because a lot of people were developing whatever relationship they could. So if they were somebody in, say, Portland, and they might be having a friend in Greece, they were communicating and they were developing some sort of relationship bond. Now, whether they actually get to fly from Portland to Greece and actually have the economic wherewithal to actually make it a physical and a real relationship, only time will tell, and only the fates of the world will tell, and definitely God's message will tell as well. But definitely, I'm just wondering, what is your thoughts? Did you see, even in your own coaching, a lot of these newer, because I mean, long distance relationships have been there forever, but it did seem like more people were open to the notion of it during the pandemic?
Yeah. So I think that kind of the pandemic was such a pressure cooker. So I think some people went like one way and a lot of other people went the other way, you know. So what I've seen in relationships is that a lot of people really became aware of what does not work, you know, like so many people like separated, so many people, when they has finally spent time with their partner, they were like, oh my gosh, we actually hate each other. We just never spent time together. And so it was very intense. But I think a lot of people also, as you said, they got incredibly flexible, and they realized, oh, okay, there's like this super adverse thing. What can I do to actually make it better and to make it work? And what I've seen is also that people were suddenly like, they got really brave, and they were like, I'm going to move country and I'm going to do something, because it made them aware that life can be very, very short. So what I would say is that people still kind of like relate in quite like a classical way, but the pandemic has, I think, forced everybody in all areas of life, but also in relationships, to really face kind of like what's holding them back, face their patterns, face their issues. And for some people, it was very, very positive. But I think also some others, I think, are still struggling with all of this. And I truly believe on a spiritual level that this is really a time of proving, and that coping mechanisms that we have done for the last 100 years, so to speak, are not working anymore, and that's right now the real, it's kind of like really trying times. But I also really love it, because I think that if you really commit, that you wanna really know yourself, you know, that you maybe want to find God, or you wanna really develop, it's a really good time to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Hey, Diane, the other thing that I saw a lot of people doing this time of the pandemic, and like I said, I think they officially declared it over like in the last day or so, even though there's still people that are facing the disease and still dealing with it on a lot of different levels and everything. But we also saw, as Veronica just alluded to, a lot of people that were like, always, well, because of the division, and it wasn't just here, it was in various other aspects of the world, because nationalism is a big problem throughout the world and everything. We're like, oh, I'm just going up and move. And we just see a lot of people even do expatriate kind of moves to like Bali and a number of other places, Morocco, and a number of other spaces. So I was just wondering, is that something that even you and your husband and your family ever considered? I know you're doing a lot of positive work in the diversity field, or did you have any of your friends? Because I know that one of our fellow show host, he actually did it. He moved to, once he was in the Far East, like around Japan and in Bali, and now he's back home in Houston. But Billy definitely took his family, helping move the entire family there for a matter of time during the pandemic, because they had made some money off the military, so they had the wherewithal to do it. And I've definitely interviewed a few folks that did it as well, including a young lady that was also in Bali as well. But I just wondered, how much of that were you seeing in your own life?
So my husband and I both work in tech. And so we saw sort of a lot of what you're describing, the digital nomadism,
Mm.
where people moved to places that they always wanted to live at. Um, my husband and myself live beside the ocean in Massachusetts. Like it kind of became a matter of why, where would you want to go? Like we have some of the best summers in the world. Um, but what I would say to Veronica's point is that what I saw the most of during the pandemic in my line of work was a real focus on building community and
Mhm.
how much focus we had on building intentional relationships and how many more people I was exposed to as a result of not necessarily being confined by my space limitations, right? Because then I was able to talk to people who were worldwide doing the same things that I do and try to have conversations about, okay, what are you seeing? What issues are you facing? What solutions are you bringing to the people in your lives and the leaders in your lives that are helping push the needle on these issues? So we were able to come together as communities in a very big way. So while I am seeing that divisiveness being drummed into society constantly, I'm also seeing a lot of really cool things around building community to sort of push back against that tide of just the constant hate and negativity. So I see that that's happening intentionally, and that's been really great.
No, I've definitely seen a lot of what they call community building, and definitely seen that on both the local level and on the national and international level.
Yes.
And sometimes I wonder about that term because sometimes people use that term very loosely and everything. So definitely, I'd love to hear y'all's definition of what community means to y'all, because definitely different folks will have different definitions of community. Sometimes it's a like-mindedness. Sometimes it's, as Bill just alluded to earlier, it can be people that are totally not in the same camp and all in that space, but they can be in a similar environment, whatever that environment is. So I'd love to hear all of y'all's definition of what community means to you. So I'll start with you, Veronica, and work round robin.
It's a hard question. Someone else wants to?
I would say that my community changes based on what we're talking about, right? So, like, I have my community of parents that I get a lot from. I have my community of people who are raising children with neurodiversity the way that I am, so that I'm not constantly having to be like, "Oh my God, is this different? Is this the wrong way to do this? How am I thinking about this?" And somebody else will have already done like miles and miles of research and just be like, "Oh, well, these three things helped my son." I have relationships and community locally in the Massachusetts area. So it depends on my definition of community are the people who are building life with me, I would say. So the more I grow and the older I get, the more flexible I am with the location of the community and more about the intentionality and the work that we put into it.
What about you, Bill?
We're talking about community in general.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so as you already know from the conversation I've already had, the community I'm focused on is the kingdom of God. It's His children, and we're all His children. However, we have a choice in this life. We're either part of His family for eternity, or we're not, and He's given us the ability to make that choice. Deuteronomy 30:19, I think it is. He's telling us, why would you pick death when He's giving you life or eternal life? So if I'm going to build the foundation of my life, I'm going to build it on something that I think is eternal, not something that is about today. It's eternal. So when I look at that community building, in Iran, as an example, there are about 3 million Christians in Iran. There are 85 million people in the country. It's the fastest growing church in the world. Why? Because they're able to see the difference between the two religions, and they've been brought up in a religion. They know exactly what that religion is about, and now they're getting, a lot of them are having dreams in the middle of the night, and then they're connecting with some online community or some underground church, and that the whole church has to be underground. All 3 million people are underground. They're meeting in people's homes. China, same thing. It's going on in China. So that's the community that I'm focused on, but I'm trying to help here in the United States, more people just connect. And so I'll give you an example. When my grandson was 6, he had a little Lego car that he had just built, had 100 pieces. And so the conversation he and I were having was around evolution versus creation. So I said, let's take this car and we'll go out in the backyard and we'll break it into 100 pieces and we'll put it out on the lawn there. And how many years do you think it's going to take for that car, through wind and earthquake, tornadoes and animals coming by and for it to go back into that car, the 100 pieces? He laughed. He said, it's impossible. Of course it's impossible. It doesn't matter how many billions of years you try to do. It's impossible. Well, if you look at our DNA, it's the same thing. It's impossible. So you have to build on the truth, in my opinion. So that's what I'm trying to do, is help build communities on the truth. And that's why I'm working on this pro-love, because unfortunately, you can't build community when people are divided on issues that are serious issues that people face every day. And Christianity has been misrepresented in those issues. So that's how I'm building community. And that's what I'm trying to help here in this country, because we have got a lot of wounds that need to be healed in this country. And so I'm going to just give you a quick, if it's okay, I'll give you a quick solution on abortion, since we spent the time on it. Is that all right? Or you want me to take the time or not?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So if we're forming a Christian community around this issue, the Christian community should be one that says, if you are pregnant and it's an unwanted pregnancy or unplanned pregnancy or whatever the issue is, you have a place you can come where we're going to discuss the 5 choices you have and give you the truth about all 5, and whichever one you pick, including abortion's one of the 5, if you pick it, we're going to support you 100%. We're going to be behind you 100%. Whatever you need to be able to deal with this situation, we're going to be there for you before and after the abortion. But we're going to tell you about the other 4 choices too, and we're going to discuss them. And we're going to be there if you pick one of the others to provide if it's money you need, or food, or housing, or transportation, or counseling, or medical care, or whatever it is you need, we're going to be there to do that. Forget about laws. We shouldn't have laws telling her. She should make the decision. The woman should make the decision. There shouldn't be all laws on this issue. It's just like, God could have stopped Hitler from killing 6 million Jews. He didn't. That was Hitler's choice. And the people that followed him, that was his choice. So that's my opinion on it. And that's our solution to abortion, is to not make it a political issue, not make it a legal issue, make it a choice by the people that are actually involved in the process or the problem or whatever you want to call it, and let them have the supports necessary for them to pick any of the 5 choices.
But along those same lines, and I'd love to hear maybe Di's thoughts on this. One of the arguments that they have had within the whole abortion debate, and y'all probably got to this in y'all's discussion, is it is one thing to tell somebody to make a decision on one way or the other, but where the big argument that I've heard comes in is, if you are not going to, if you're going to stop abortions, or you're not going to have people given that option or whatever, there is some people that are concerned about what are you doing with the care of the child from the time that they are born to the time that they are adults and able to make their own decisions. Because that's one of the arguments that I've heard within the abortion debate, is that it is one thing to tell folks to make a decision one way or the other, but are we doing enough to actually deal with the kids that come into the earth? Or are we giving them enough support? Because a lot of them are coming into some very bad environments, and I don't know that we're adjusting the parenthood side. And like I said, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak from the parenthood side, but maybe Di has some thoughts around that, as you are a mother of 2.
Well, it may surprise you to know that, as Bill describes it, I'm medium okay with what you've described, Bill. Here, look, short version of this story. I grew up in Massachusetts foster care system. I aged out of the foster care system when I was 21. I did not have any parental support. I did not have sort of any love for my family. I have weird Mother's Days every year as a result, because I watch everybody post about how much they love their mother. I don't have a mother. So the short version of this is that I think that if we are trusting women and we are leaving these decisions between women and their doctors, or pregnant people and their doctors, whomever, I am okay with that. I do not like conversations that limit the rights of women, especially when we don't understand each situation. We have a lot in our communities. We all know women who have been raped. We all know women who have needed abortion care. We all know women who have needed these things. And I don't think of these people as murderers or any of these sort of very easy but awful things that we describe. And I agree that we cannot make abortion illegal and expect that these children that come to the earth as a result of that are going to be raised in a way that we would want them raised, right? Those are children that are going to end up in foster care, in poverty, not being fed. We have so many children living in poverty and not having food in their bellies night to night for this to be the issue. I cannot believe that any religion would want children to come to this earth to be mistreated and abused and any of the things that we're seeing today. So from my perspective, I think this should be a discussion between, community leaders, certainly like Bill, but definitely between the pregnant person and her doctor. I think we need to trust women. I think we need to not be regulating against certain things. I don't think we need to continue to mix. I'm very saddened by what's happened, because the repercussions of this, I think, will be felt in our communities for a long time. So I'm hoping that
So
leaders. Yes, please.
Can I
Please respond. Yes,
to
of course.
you would described as a problem is a part of our solution. We spent a lot of time talking about that very thing. One of the people on our panel, if you watched one of the videos, her father was in the situation you were in and never felt loved, never felt wanted his whole life. And when she named her child after him, it was the first time he said he could say, I really felt like I was valued in this world. We have a solution to deal with that problem, and because part of the process is if the woman chooses to have an adoption be the solution, there will be a family that adopts, not a foster system. So in Florida and in Washington, D.C., there are two church communities that developed, and they eliminated there is no foster process anymore. It's gone, because there are more people that want children than there are people that are having abortions right now even. So if it's organized properly, that can happen. And you as an example would have had adoptive parents from day one who wanted you badly as their child and would have given you the love and support, and you would have had a mother. So that's part of the solution.
I appreciate that, definitely. But I've had what's the short version of this? When we have a situation where someone has been raped, they should be able to access an abortion. When we have a situation where somebody's become pregnant by incest, they should be able to have an abortion. It does not have anything so much to do with the fact that there needs to be more adoptive families. There's not enough children to fill those families, because you cannot adopt out the cells. You would have to grow that. You would have to grow that crime into a child that you would then put up for adoption. I am just saying that I don't want people put into those trauma situations.
I agree with you.
I'm agreeing. I'm just making sure that I am clear about my views here.
Yeah, because I think we started with the 5 solutions, remember? And you.
I hear you. I'm just saying life is complicated.
So it makes it, when you pick one like that, it makes it sound like, okay, your solution isn't going to work because of this. No, we already addressed that issue. The issue is the woman has the choice. No laws, nothing gets in her way. But they're not all going to be aborted, because there are plenty of people who were raped, kept the child, and are happy that they've kept the child 30 years later. So it's not a one solution fits all. It's every one is the decision of the woman. And I think that's important. Okay. And we're in agreement.
Nope, agree.
Yeah, y'all are definitely agreeing on that aspect. There might just be some nuanced differences. And as we're getting ready to wind down very shortly and everything, the other thing that I'm oftentimes shocked by, and Veronica may be shocked, particularly being from another part of the world and everything, and I don't know how it is in Germany and some of the European countries, but I am oftentimes shocked at the amount of homelessness, and you kind of alluded to it, Di, that goes on in our society. And I mentioned it when I talked about what Reverend Barber is doing with his Poor People's Campaign. But I'm going like to be the greatest society in America, in the world, and all in that space. And there are some that might argue one way or the other, because there are some countries that might try to challenge us on whether we are number one or not. But I would definitely say we are a top country and have been a top country historically. But the way that we treat those that are the least of these, I think, is a crime. And the fact that we have homeless kids and homeless adults in this country makes no sense to me. I literally live around the corner from Duke University, and I know that there are some homeless even in this general area. And I'm going like, how? And with the amount of affluence that is here and everything. So I didn't know if either had any thoughts on that issue, because I was going to get to that, and then I was going to get to one that's a little bit more lighthearted. And then I'm going to have all of y'all answer a quick question I give everybody. So we'll wrap up in another 5-10 minutes. But definitely, if you have any thoughts around the nature of the homeless issue as well, anybody.
Yeah, maybe for me it's very interesting because, as you maybe know, like Germany has like this really big like social state. So like you get so much social security, holidays, everything. And for me, I always look to the US, and I love that you guys have so much freedom for people. It's definitely much more, it's like more freedom, less control than I think in the German system. But it also always astonished me that it seems to be with this freedom that there comes like this, there's not really a net that people can like fall to. And
Right.
I think it would be so beautiful to see that we can find like a balance like in the middle where, people, because I see all these documentaries, for example, about LA, and it must be crazy there, like absolutely, that people literally camp on the streets. And yesterday when I was here, because we do also have a lot of homelessness here, but I think it's a little bit more evened out. And definitely, I think not like whole families camping, for example. Yeah.
Anybody else's thoughts on the homeless situation? And then I was going to get to the other more lighthearted question.
I suppose I've been homeless. So my thoughts on the homeless situation is that in a country with this much money, in a country with this much power, it's just, if we're going to march around telling everybody how great we are, we should definitely be making sure that we don't have starving children and veterans asleep on our streets. So I think we have a responsibility as people to take care of the least of us.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm torn a little bit about who should make the decisions and who should be the one that distributes the help or care or whatever it is that they need, whether it should be the government or, I mean, I would rather give that money to Salvation Army, to be honest with you. I think they would come up with a better solution than the government. But there needs to be something done. And, churches are a great place to make that happen. So there are a lot of people in churches who are definitely there with their money and their time and their energy to try to solve this problem. But we're not getting the support from the top. And so I would like to see the dollars distributed to the ones that are already working in this environment, and give them more money and let them spread their solution out to solve this problem.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. The thing I was going to ask, in slightly lighthearted, but not as deep as some of the other ones, was I am a big fan of Mother Nature and all in that space. I will definitely go and check out some of the squirrels and the robins, since it is springtime and all in that space. So I was just wondering, and it's actually a twofold question, because the other thing that I'm a big fan of is having a connection to those that have moved on. So I definitely feel that the ancestors, and sometimes when people pass, I will definitely think of those people that have passed as being new angels that are guiding your path. And I've definitely shared that with some of my friends that have lost loved ones, and it's something that I try to even do in my own life when I have lost loved ones, like an uncle, well, some uncles and aunts and things in that space. But I was just wondering, how important has ancestry and Mother Nature been to all three of you? So I'll start with you, Di, and definitely I want to hear from Bill and Veronica as well, because I don't know if you have pets. I used to have pets, don't have a pet at the moment, but I definitely am a fan of even going out and observing Mother Nature, but also having that connection to the ancestors as well.
Well, I told you my ancestors were pagan. I mean, I'm samesies, right? Like, I get it. If you were at my house today, you would be one of the folks making fun of me for my Disney princess outdoor yard, where we have now ducks, too, girl duck and boy duck. We have crows. Like, it's the funniest thing. I went out and bought this extra special seed because in the pandemic I got really into bird watching. Like now that I'm 40, I'm like, woo, bird watching. So like I have ducks, I have crows, I have squirrels, I have the nice squirrels and then the red squirrels that are aggressive at each other. So for me, I feel very connected to nature. I live beside the ocean. I'm grateful every day. I'm really I mean, I've seen this said many times, but I came up from nothing. I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? Like this is already the coolest that I expected my life to be, right? I have no reason to be here. So like I just assume that it is just blessing after blessing. So like I take all of these animals in my yard and I think, cool. All right. So
Hey, Di, before I get to Veronica and Bill, I can relate because Mom has both turkey and deer. And I remember that she said, I think it was the turkey, she had not had a sighting of the deer yet, but they had been gone there for a while and she was trying to figure out where they were at because it's an entire family at her house there in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. But definitely she was in a conversation we're having because I talked regularly to my mom. She was like, oh, they're back. And now that put joy in her heart. That was her exact words today. It put joy in her heart. The fact that
yes.
she had seen them out and about after they had done that disappearing act there for a minute because she was trying to figure out when they were going to appear since we've already been in the midst of spring now for a couple of months. So she was like wondering where they were at. So when they finally came, and now I think she's just waiting for the deer to come, but definitely she was glad to see them out and about. And
you get involved. You get involved in your outdoor like animals. You get like all torn up.
Yeah, you get torn up, and then sometimes you wonder where they are at because my parents are divorced, but my dad's a lady love, and they've been together for a while. But Miss Linda had actually posted in her social media site the fact that she lives in downtown Durham, and apparently there's a family of chickens that are floating around in downtown Durham, and we can't figure out why. But she's like, just because that's literally what she posted on her post. She was like, has anybody else seen these chickens, or am I just imagining these chickens? They're actually in that particular community, and who knows, they might have gotten loose from a farm or whatever.
Yeah.
Or they're enjoying their freedom.
They'd be in my yard if they were here.
Be over there trying to get fed by you and everything. Veronica, how much has nature and ancestors meant to you over there in Germany?
Yeah, so for me as a coach, I'm always on this like deep healing journey because that's a place from how I work. And recently I really got into nervous system healing, and I found this modality which is so simple. It's just walking bare feet on the ground, and it's like it has huge benefits. And so as I heal more, I can feel being more connected to this beautiful place where we live. And it's so nice because it's almost like that often I was so in my mind, in my head, that I couldn't even see, what was offered to me. So this gratitude is really entering my life. And the same actually with ancestors. So I felt always like a real big disconnect because I come from a big farming family and there was no records at all towards my ancestors. But my cousin, he made a big family tree with as many photos as we had from the marriages from the great-grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers and so on. And through that, I've been really connecting. And especially, of course, also, I think you can, connect with the energy of your ancestors to guide and support you. And I find that very, very beautiful. Yeah.
No doubt. Bill, how much has the connection to your own parents and ancestors been, and how much have you had that journey with Mother Nature as well? Because I do think it is part of God's great plan as well. And sometimes I don't think we pay enough attention. I'll just give a quick narrative before hearing yours, Bill. But when 9/11 happened, I was probably in my as a matter of fact, I was in my late 30s at that particular time and all in that space. And I remember talking to some friends of mine because we used to gather at his art gallery, and that is no longer around. Another friend owns a different art gallery at that same space, but we would gather. And one of the things we observed, and I think I observed it during the pandemic as well, was that it was almost as if God sent a message to the animals. Because one of the things that I have asked friends of mine, including friends of mine from New York, I was like, when that attack happened, what were the animals doing, or did you notice anything about the animals? Because one of the things that I observed was like the animals were like, they got that message from God, and they're like, I'm out of here. Because literally, the area that has birds and squirrels and a number of other things, including the pigeons up there in New York, when I've talked to folks, they've been like, nope, didn't see an animal, didn't see any animal in the sky. It was like even the most crazy vermins like rats and everything were like, humans are about to get really stupid. God has already told us so. So we're going to go hide and we'll come out later on. And I would say the same thing happened with the pandemic, because when we all got locked in, that's when the animals came out and everything. Because the animals like, hey, the humans are inside. So that's when we heard tales of animals from the sea going out into the Italian canals, and animals from even here. I think the deers were starting to walk downtown Durham and everything, because they knew that they could do that because we were all locked inside. But that's just my observation of how sometimes the animals might be listening to God more than even we are listening to God.
So my connection to ancestors is my grandmother. So when I was growing up, I spent summers with her, and then after college, I spent 2 years with her. I lived with her for 2 years, her and my grandfather. And they were Catholic, so they went to church every week, and I drove them. They couldn't drive at that point, so I would drive them to church and then go with afterwards to one of their friends' houses. And of course, they would be talking in Croatian, so I didn't understand about 2/3 of what they said, but that wasn't the important part. The important part was I got a chance to be with her for 2 years, and she never once talked to me about the Bible, never once, but she lived it. I got to see Jesus in the way she lived her life. And so when I started studying when I was in my 40s and started reading the Bible, I completely reflected back on what she was like and what she did. And it was like, wow, great connection. So that's the ancestor part. The animals, we love animals. So we have deer that run down our street and around our house all the time. And we have I don't know if it's one family, but there's like 10 or 12 turkeys. And if they're on the street, they will not move. You have to wait till they get out of the way to drive by. And where we are right now, we're on vacation, by the way. And we're on vacation. So we're taking walks, and there's ponds, and there's egrets, and there's all the geese are down here from Canada. So there's geese everywhere, and they're having their babies. So there's all these little babies running around, and then there's turtles in the ponds, and there's hundreds of them. And yeah, it's awesome. It's just connecting with what God created. That's why he did all this, is for our joy. And so of course we should get joy from everything he created.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. As you mentioned Jesus and everything, I was thinking about, speaking of ancestors, my grandmother on my mother's side, and I still am not sure which aunt has it, even though I think it's the youngest aunt. But there was, and I'm sure you'll be able to relate to it, but everybody, particularly if they lived in certain rural towns, remembers that pictures that would always be following you around. Because definitely, no matter whether you're being the most virtuous kid that you could be and everything, there was that picture of Jesus that was literally on the mantle. So, and it was in the mantle in the living room. So no matter where you were at, you always knew that those eyes were following you around it, all in that space. And I'm sure that even though she was raised in a pagan family, she might have gone to visit family that had that particular.
I remember that Jesus on the mantle. Absolutely. It depended what family you went into, right? Because like Jesus tended to change. You had white Jesus, you had black Jesus. It depended where you went. But Jesus stayed the same, always on the mantle. Absolutely.
On the mantle, yeah. I think this is the white Jesus, and literally.
There you go. White Jesus.
And they're following you around and everything. I think that sometimes if you were doing something that it did not approve of, or that the family member did not approve of, I'm sure that the times that my grandfather was defending his baseball watching and his wrestling watching it, and people that were probably wanted to switch the channel, I'm sure he probably directed them toward that particular picture, as if to say that, oh, you don't want to do that because it's already said that you don't want to do that. So sure thing might have done that aversion gaze in order to get you to look in that general direction.
Followed you around the room.
It literally followed you around the room, and no matter what you were doing and everything. Well, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I hope you all have enjoyed it as much as I have. One of the things I do with all my guests as they get ready to head out the door and everything, whether it's on this one or on the online dinner party, is that I get them to share their message of positivity. And we've had a lot of message of positivity throughout this course of this conversation. And also, if they want to give their social media handles and in ways that they can be reached again and all in that space. And as I have said to many of my guests, I don't think I've had a guest yet that I have not wanted to bring back. So y'all are all welcome to come back on a future show and share some more of your journey and your stories and all along those lines. So I guess I'll go and start with Veronica. So there's a message of positivity and hope that you would like to share with the world. And if you want to tell folks how they can reach you and your social media handles, and then the same with Di and Bill. But I'll start with you, Veronica.
Okay, so what I would like to share is that I know for many people, maybe for you, relationships are so incredibly difficult, but you are a relational being. You are meant to be in relationships with a partner, with friends, with families, and these skills can be learned. So if you find this so difficult, I encourage you learn how to communicate really well, learn how to feel your feelings, learn how to read other people on a deeper level. And I promise you, if you invest a little bit of time, you're going to see amazing results and you're going to feel so fulfilled. And if you want to learn more, I actually do free relationship webinars every Wednesday on Meetup. So you can Google the Conscious Relationship School on meetup.com. Also, if you Google Veronica Maya on meetup.com, you'll also find it. And you can also find me on YouTube, where I post regular content and also give a lot of relationship tips. So be happy to connect with you.
Sounds great. And before I get to Di and everything, since the two of you are in that married state and everything, you mean to tell me, Veronica, that it is not too late, because on July 1st, which is only about a month and a half from now, I will turn the big 6-1. And as I've said, I've been single all my life and I've not to get that marriage partner. So you mean to tell me that it's not too late, that there is still hope for marriage in my life and everything? So it's not too late?
There's so much hope, especially when you're so handsome as you are, Mark.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Di, if you want to share how you can be reached, and definitely if you can share a message of positivity and hope as well.
So I know you wouldn't notice it to look at me, but I have had a lot of people say to me in my life, "Who do you think you are?" So let me say to anybody listening that if there has been somebody that's dogging you and telling you, "Who do you think you are?" you keep doing what you're doing. They don't set your boundaries. If they're telling you they don't think you can do something, it has nothing to do with you, because that's because they don't think that they can do something. Those are their limitations and boundaries. That has nothing to do with you. You were sent here on this earth to do a job, and you should do it. Don't listen to those other folks. They don't know. They don't know why you're here. You do what you're supposed to do. You grow as big as you're supposed to grow. Don't try to fit anybody else's boxes. That's not going to work. That's not growth. So do you, do your job. I'm proud of you. Stay on it. If you want to reach me, I'm at dicirulo.com, DICIRUOLO.com. You can buy my books. I just released a memoir of my experiences in foster care. It's called Indomitable, a foster care story, and I would love to get your feedback if you read it. Thanks.
Appreciate that, and definitely appreciate that thought, and I definitely hear that message and everything. The one thing I was going to say, and then I'm going to go to Bill as well, is that sometimes we spend too much time living outside of our purpose and all of that, because there is this notion of, a lot of times we like to be supportive, and I'm not saying that you don't want to be supportive of your friends and acquaintances, but I do know, because I've even been guilty of it, that sometimes you aren't necessarily living your dream, you're living other people's dreams as well. And that's something we all got to work against sometimes, because I know there have been times that friends have been giving me this whole narrative of what they wanted to do and how I need to play a role in it. And then at the end of it, I was realizing, hey, that's not my dream, that's your dream. And I can support your dream, but I don't necessarily have to live the entirety of the dream if it isn't my whole dream, and only in that space.
Yes.
Yeah. Bill, as we wrap up, and
So I would say that the message I would like to leave is read the Bible for yourself. I waited till I was past 40 before I started reading the Bible. I would highly recommend everybody do it for themselves. Don't take anybody else's word for what the Bible says. Read it yourself. It's God's love letter to you individually, every one of us. So I can be contacted, or you can, if you want to read the material that I've written, you can go to www.reasoningwithgod.com. It's on YouTube under the same, or Pro Love, either one of those two, and in Facebook under reasoningwithgod.com, or Reasoning with God on Facebook. That's it. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I said, hope that all three of you will make a return trip and all in that space. As you were talking this whole time, Bill, and everything, I was remembering, and I don't know if this bumper sticker is still as popular as it used to be, but as you've been talking this whole 2 hours and plus, I've been reflecting and remembering a bumper sticker that used to be very popular, and it was the WWJD, which was the bumper sticker, What Would Jesus Do? And all in that. And like I said, I do remember seeing that quite a bit on a number of cars, definitely before the pandemic, but I'm not sure if it's as popular as it used to be, but it is something that probably a lot of folks could probably live by and go by, is thinking about what would Jesus do if he was in these situations. Because I think in a lot of the situations, he would probably not be doing what some of our leaders are doing, in the sense of ignoring a lot of folks. That's just my opinion. And like I said, there are some, including some in the church, that might disagree with me, but I'm going like, I think that he would probably be going in the favor of a lot of social causes that do not get enough love, in my opinion. But I definitely think he would be doing a lot in those realms, and particularly, as we said earlier, working to make sure that there are no homeless and that we are feeding the poor and doing a number of other things that we are not doing enough of. And I also don't think that he would be that big a fan of the divide and would be trying to find ways to unify us. Because while we have had presidents that have claimed to be wanting to unify, I don't know we've had anybody that has actually done a good job of that. But I do think that the Jesus that I know and the God that I know is one that is a unifying force. So that's just my opinion. I think that all three of you would probably agree with that.
Agree.
For sure.
Cool. Well, we're going to go out with a Friends of Mine commercial, and it is a commercial about natural living, because we talked about that a little bit in the conversation. So one of the shows that we have is a show that Barbara and Shawnee Smith do. They are not related. Shawnee is actually her office assistant, or the main person in the Empowering You movement that Barbara Smith launched, and she is a motivational speaker. But Shawnee has her Can Do Spices, which ironically, even though this is Mother's Day was yesterday and everything, the holiday coming up is Father's Day in June, and she actually did it because of a love of cooking that she developed with her father. And this commercial actually talks about that, and you'll hear what I'm talking about in this particular commercial, and then I'll hear the in broadcast right after this particular announcement.
You know how people love to enjoy food and don't understand how to flavor their food or how to replicate a meal? They're interested in supplements, but don't know where to begin? Well, what I do is I take the guesswork out of enjoying flavor and wellness with my flavorful spice blends, so that they can create delicious meals with healing benefits. Can Do Spice was created to help cooks at any level enjoy healing through food. Every spice blend was designed to give added health benefits of natural herbs. Every blend is complete. There's no need to add any additional spice for a delicious meal. Saving you time and money while adding supplements to your meals can be both tasty and fun. My earliest memories in the kitchen began with my father, Kenny Can Do Bond, so it was fitting that I would name this line after him. I have always looked to natural remedies to supplement the body, and I found myself hiding herbs and minerals in foods for my family. That's when it hit me. Everyone needs Can Do Spice. Everyone should be having this. It's an exclusive brand for cooks at any level who want to create flavorful dishes with healing benefits that can satisfy the body and soul. Add a little spice to your life. Give Can Do Spice a try.